We have Jess here at Sign at the Table today. We met, how long ago was it? 10 years?
More than that.
So we met through the performing arts. I thought it would be great to sit with you and just have a chat about the industry and how we can really examine how deaf people can be included, what barriers we face, and just have an open discussion about it. We first met through Deferent Theatre. No, that wasn't it.
No, it was before that actually. We had an opportunity to work with Medina to create a show for Gaslight Deaf Festival. I remember discussing with Medina who to cast, and coincidentally you'd posted a video on Facebook asking, where are the opportunities? Where are they?
That's right. I remember back then I was in year 10 at the time.
You were a baby.
Right. I'd been heavily involved in the arts, specifically theatre, in Sydney, but only in hearing spaces. That's the time when I had to move to Melbourne, and I was really worried about what would happen next. I was so deeply involved in Sydney that to just disconnect from it made me feel just directionless. I thought, fuck it. Like I said, I'm in my fuck it era.
Fuck it.
It feels like I've come full circle. Just fuck it, because what could go wrong? That Facebook video was awesome. Brent and I were in it together and it was just lovely. It was a good way to experiment.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if at that time I had already directed a show before or after Gaslight. That work was with hearing actors, and really it was just me determining two things at the time. Firstly, can I do this? Can I direct? And secondly, do I enjoy it? Throughout that project, my answers were yes and yes, so that was great. And I was really fortunate that I'd had acting experience prior, and I'd worked with an incredible director and gained a really healthy model of what a good leadership looks like in a creative space, and with other deaf people too. I was fortunate in that the aforementioned director was female as well, so there was something about the capacity of care within that particular space and context, which was creating theatre with other deaf and hard of hearing performers. I've always had this consuming passion for storytelling. I am obsessed with stories, and I would go to my library at school and I'd watch movies, I'd be reading, I'd be people watching, and there's just something inherent about it. You know, I'm referring back to that creative space as an actor. I knew I wanted the director's role. So I came with Medina for that opportunity, and she's so well respected in our community, and we were just looking for two actors who were brave and, like you said, fuck it. That's bravery, to post a public video and declare, I'm here, I'm willing, I want this. I could see with your experience too, and it didn't have to be extensive experience, but you had something we could work with, and we weren't starting from scratch.
I feel like when you know what you want, that comes from experience. You can't set your sights on something if you've never experienced it before. Once you've had a taste of it, you can zero in on it and go for it. I think it's to do with visibility. As a director, what's been the impact on your work when you see the amount of deaf actors we have here in Australia?
Yeah, I think it's less about visibility and more about the resourcing. So obviously we have this unique issue of the geography of Australia, with deaf creatives scattered all across this land. And we may have access to a number of deaf creatives, yes, but there's a physical distance between them. And you need to consider the pathways too. Obviously, the system we live in, like needing to have income to pay expenses, then the arts becomes just less of a priority. I'm a big advocate for arts in school, in the community, everywhere. And I think it's really important that the community grows, and that's how empathy grows and connection increases. So think about it. Say, for example, when someone passes away, you might not have the words to express how you feel about that person. So something like poetry is used to express your feelings. And that's art. That's connection. That's the feeling of, okay, so someone's experienced this before, not just me, and that feels less lonely. So coming back to your question of visibility, there's a couple of caveats. I appreciate working with people who are willing to make themselves visible in other contexts. What do I mean by that? If somebody approaches me and says, I want to be a performer. Okay, I'm not seeing you at workshops. I'm not seeing you at theatre events. I'm not seeing you at festivals. I'm not seeing you present and taking it in. So consequently, I will question your motivations and your integrity, because this is my work. When I'm seeing a person regularly in those contexts, I recognize this person is motivated, hungry, and willing to be visible. This job is very visible. It's very vulnerable and very collaborative. So all of these ingredients are what I can work with. And you can't teach that. You can't force that to happen. I can teach rehearsal etiquette. I can teach the language and all of that. Great. And yes, that is a load that I have to hold as a deaf director. And again, going back to the systems of education and other institutions that are not spaces for signed languages, like auditions, we don't have the option to sign often. And there's exposure of deaf people on stage and having that representation, but where are the opportunities? Opportunities start back at writers, producers. So there's many, many layers to this industry. Sometimes you need to crack through, and then you'll find yourself be cut off, so you have to find an alternative way to break through. And my way was through acting and then transitioning across.
It's interesting that you mentioned the opportunities. I think we are very fortunate to live in a world where you can make your own opportunities rather than waiting.
And you should.
That's right. Rather than waiting for a writer or a producer, everything's right there on your phone. Whatever you do, however you produce, post everything. I posted the vlog on Facebook because I didn't see any opportunities, but that doesn't mean they're not out there. It just means they haven't seen me yet. So, look, lots of people say there aren't any performances happening. Okay, so what are you doing about it? Don't just sit back and wait for something to turn up. That's not how opportunities find you. If you're going to sit back and wait, you need to do something in the meantime. You need to look for opportunities. And looking doesn't mean to see if something already exists. It means to expose what you can do. Imagine creating your theatre resume. You can't expect to land that top theatre job if you have nothing to show in your previous experience.
Yeah, waiting doesn't equal experience.
Exactly. And in your resume, you list your studies, where you learnt certain skills, your licenses and credentials. This translates to PD, camps and other events you've been involved in for theatre. It doesn't have to be a formal program of study like through NIDA, NIDA. You don't need to go to NIDA to achieve what you set out to do. Start at the bottom, start small, join something in your local area. From my experience, I've noticed people don't show up to workshops. There is demand and high visible need for the workshops, but there isn't the authentic engagement to match it. When you hold a workshop, people don't come. We'll probably never know why. We just have to keep going.
I consider the garden metaphor. Like, if you sit and watch for growth, nothing will happen. So now is the time to plant the seeds and tend to the garden of yourself. Research is an example. Like yesterday I read a play, and that's part of my research of different types of playwriting. I applied for theatre camp, which will happen next month. It's all about taking it in. It's how my brain works too. Like theatre, it's building on what I have and then building on that and then making all the connections. Yet how we receive information now is through scrolling the algorithm, and the mind isn't making the connections as there's no space to do that. So as much as there may be some incredible resources out there, there's something really powerful in the doing. So it's not... Also, it's about finding your people. Saying, hey, you and I vibe, similar values, let's collaborate. And we've been fortunate.
It just takes two people, or you can do it yourself, really.
Well, unfortunately and fortunately, theatre is a very collaborative space, so it's not something you can do alone. Like a painter can paint and then show their work for people to look at. But with theatre, there's the collaboration between the artists in the development of the show, and then there's the exchange that happens with the audience. So we need to have that audience. And I've been really fortunate. I've been blessed to work with you 3 times now. And again, having that pathway of our first work together with Deferent Theatre twice. And we could build on that working relationship. We started building and then consolidating the work. And that's just really special.
Really, to just summarise that point, just take the leap. It's into the unknown. Try it. Don't just say, I want this thing, but you've never even tried it before.
Right? I'm making a work now that I wouldn't have been able to make if I hadn't done my previous works. So as much as what you're working on right now may feel like a once off, it's not. You're still building your practice, your tastes, your vision. You're working with people while becoming more confident and assertive in your provision.
And it's never too late to start. People think you need to start when you're in school, but you can start now. Or when you're in your 50s, 60s, just start now.
The deaf community is incredibly varied, and we need presence from everyone.
Definitely. Regarding unrealistic representation, what are your thoughts regarding the current landscape? Not in reference to film or television, but in the performing arts space. What are you vibing with? What's going on?
Yeah, right now we're in 2026, post-COVID, and the industry is still recovering from the impact of the COVID lockdowns. That's not to say that the representation before that was ideal. I think the industry has been distracted by access. So often the question is, okay, how can we make this accessible for audience who might buy a ticket? Which is really a capitalistic approach. And they might provide an interpreter who will deliver the content in Auslan on the stage. But they're not thinking, how can we support our deaf creatives, both on stage and off? There's not many of those conversations happening. I'm not seeing them. And deaf representation is not happening. We're not seeing our bodies on the stage and on paper. We just put an interpreter on the stage and tick that box. Then organisations wonder why deaf people are either not coming or they're offering critiques. And it's because they've just provided an Auslan interpreter. Even the process of translation, provision of an interpreter, is not always done safely. And not every show is appropriate to have interpreters anyway. That's a whole nother conversation. Representation is linked to the presence of deaf people in the room. If we're not in the room, then there's no representation.
And that's in the room from the start. Not added on later, not in post-development being consulted about how they could have done it better.
Yeah, and even then it's in the same vein of having a show with a deaf consultant. That's still not visibility. So it depends on the context of the show, the work itself, and the practice. Part of my work is taking advantage of my experience, my lived experience. I'm not just a deaf person. I have many layers to my identity. And to be positioned in the room and tell them, hey, I'm the only person that can say this. There's so much motivation to have a wider spectrum of stories. How can I do that safely? How can I do that well? How can I do that with the resources that we have? Because deaf people are resource heavy with our needs, and that's okay. You just need to be prepared. And to think it's also about the process of creative development or doing applications or writing or whatever it is, and how it looks very different for a deaf person to completely engage. And again, are they willing to deconstruct such a process, to be open-minded and trust the deaf creative to offer an alternative model? And that's what I'm currently investigating. When we do, and I do mean when, not if, when we do have deaf people on stage and their stories are being told, and off stage too, because that's both crucial, deaf people will show up in their hordes, and that's when there's revenue looking from a business perspective. That experience is so much richer, not just financially, but from a connection and presence and community and cultural perspective. Having that connection and shared experience, it's a privilege to provide. I'm one of the few people in community that does that, and I'm aware of that blessing and capacity to set up a space where, if the community permits, they say, I will come, I will enjoy, I'll have a good time, a quality experience, and I will be looked after through this process. Simply because I have been in situations where I've not been looked after and where it's not been safe. So I tell myself, okay, I've had this experience, I'm grateful for this experience because it's taught me what not to replicate. Or if a situation I'm in reflects a previous experience, then I'm like, nope, that's where I pull the handbrake on. It's an interesting conversation to consider within the wider industry and within our deaf community. It goes back to the concept of literacy. The industry isn't quite deaf literate in terms of working with deaf creatives yet. Not yet. It will happen, but it's not here yet. And then with the deaf community, arts literacy isn't great. And that's not their fault. It's just how the systems operate, and well, that's for different reasons.
Need to meet in the middle. Deaf artists can't expect the industry knows about them if they won't learn about the industry. Deaf artists need to investigate what is already there and start thinking about how it can be transformed into a deaf lens, rather than expect the industry to do all of the legwork. There needs to be a middle ground. There are ways you can develop your knowledge and skills and gain exposure to different parts of the industry rather than being solely focused on deaf space. How can we grow as a creative space if it's just an echo chamber of other deaf people? We need to step outside of our comfort zone, dip our toes in unfamiliar waters, and explore the world, taking inspiration from other ideas. You might see something and think, how can I create that in a deaf way? This idea you've seen can drive creativity from a deaf lens to make new and innovative works. There is so much potential.
Oh, it's so exciting.
I feel like many people don't feel supported and don't know where to begin with.
Yeah. To start with, I really think it's about contacting people. I didn't start until another person who's well respected in the industry commented, "You keep talking about making a show and directing, just go for it." I hesitated and they said, "Do it." That push was what I needed, and it was a push towards a festival called Anywhere Theatre Festival. That concept was presenting works in a non-traditional space, like a theatre. So the first show I directed was in a cafe. Again, having that moment, and it was low stakes too, having that person to give that nudge. What happens next is that you meet other people in the industry, such as actors and producers, and you go to networking events, maybe not so much networking, more like workshops, PDs, and you see people and you start to become more visible. And people are excited by what they don't know. Sometimes you need to rely on your intuition to work out their intentions. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm tokenized or it's culturally not appropriate and all that. And this is me saying this after 20 years in the industry. So for me, it's a curation of experience, and my responsibility as a leader is to ensure that this time is better than before.
There are grants out there to access funding. You just Google for what's available. I feel like compared to 10 years ago, the industry is hungry for accessibility. They are hungry for exposure, representation, and everything that comes with that. If you start looking, you will find grants that exist specifically to focus on disabled creatives. The word disability may not sit well with your identity, but it's there. Take advantage of that. Sometimes you need to swallow your pride in deaf culture to be able to seize the opportunity so you can get your foot in the door. There are plenty of opportunities like Art House and Malt House.
Yeah, Art House and Malt House.
Places like those have creative development funding available.
Yeah, I've done residencies there.
It's things like that where you can test the waters, and if they're open to it, you can access mentors like Jess or any of the well-respected deaf artists in the community, like you had with Medina. You can work with people who have that prior experience to get the ball rolling. And once that ball gets rolling, it doesn't stop.
I think it's also, like you said, swallowing your pride when it comes to funding. Sometimes my first funding was, $500, a smaller amount, and then the next one was $2,000. And as you become more experienced, as you said, the CV is expanding with shows and people clock it, and she's making work. We want to support her. It wasn't until I told people in the industry like Malthouse Theatre and other organisations, I said, "Hey, we're considering setting up a deaf theatre company. Do you think there's space for that?" And they said, "Go for it." It was almost like their endorsement. No, more like their permission, along with visibility and the presence of, "Hey, we're here. Anything we can do to support, we will do it." And I will say at the time when we told them, it was easier to get support. Nowadays it's trickier, I feel, and I don't know why.
Do you think it's COVID?
Yeah, and different people, turnover of staff, and different priorities.
It's not just happening in the arts, specifically the performing arts, but even more broadly, the industry is always evolving. You can't expect that it will stay the same and be ready and waiting for you. You need to evolve right alongside it. Keep up the awareness, be involved and immersed in the space. That way you can reach out at the right time, knowing the right way to explain things. You can't say, I'm ready for this opportunity without having put yourself out there and already experienced the space.
And I think it's important to check your ego and not assume you can tell all stories. Because you can't do that. I can tell my story. They can tell their stories. I can't tell their stories or take them and act like they're mine. And those people are my peers. So I need to lift them up and encourage them. And doing that makes it less laborious to have to teach. And it gives me more space to be creative and sharing that. That's the key.
The deaf community is full of intersectional identities. We are already marginalised, and as a community, we are made up of even more marginalised groups. I think we need to not perpetuate the idea that I am one of only a few people who can do this. We need to keep in mind people who, with the right skill development, could also do it. Lived experience has to come first. Their drive has to come first. Skills can be taught. How to act, that comes later. But who someone is, what they've been through, you can't teach that. So if you know anyone who doesn't have that access or opportunity to be exposed to industry, not just to learn, but also be pushed to realise, hey, I can do that. Like so many marginalised groups have the experience of being oppressed, especially in the deaf community. Lateral violence and oppression happens so often as a result of our trauma. It's a matter of learning how to step out of that cycle and move away from that behaviour in order to build up and encourage those people who, with a bit of encouragement, will gain the skills needed. You need to have that attitude. The deaf community is very different. We don't have the literacy yet. We aren't there yet. We need to move forward. We need to draw people in with us as we do. It can't be done alone.
You're right. And I think there's a dual responsibility. Not just doing it for the community, but also looking after yourself too. It's akin to putting on your oxygen mask before helping someone else. For me, I've had to go through a recovery period post-COVID with my practice where I had to take a big step back. My artist village has supported me, and now I'm in a position where I can step up and put on oxygen masks for those who may need it. And that's really important. Also, I'm aware of not being too comfortable. I have a responsibility to keep being trauma-informed, anti-racist, and consent forward in my approach. I think about how to lessen or avoid situations where a person may feel coerced or unsafe. And safety is such a big theme at the moment. That's what the industry is talking about as well. I'm thinking about me as a deaf person, my peers, and language. There's such an interesting friction around language. Theatre is a very speech-dominant art form. But then sign language is such a visual medium. And I can't think of any better medium to show it through than film and performance. It's been such an interesting journey to navigate.
It's a balancing act. Burnout occurs because of a lack of those people who roll up their sleeves and enter spaces where there's not a lot of people undertaking the same kind of work. They often feel a sense of burden to do it all rather than delegating small parts of the task to many others. There's that real feeling of responsibility. As a deaf person, who is often the only deaf person in that environment, we feel that need and to take it on ourselves because of, well, various reasons.
I'll just jump in here. I think it's about acceptance. Yeah, acceptance. Also, I think about ways that I can be supported through that acceptance. For example, I requested what's called cultural loading, It's a term from the First Nations space where they're paid an additional fee on top of their paid work to recognise the load that they're carrying and the efforts engaging in community. So I worked with a hearing organisation on a project. As a deaf person, I came in and I requested that they pay the cultural load fee. They accepted that condition. And it was their recognition of my presence in the project, as well as risk management, because I'm not there as the community. I mean, I'm not the community, but I come with an endorsement. With my name attached, that means that the community will have their assumption of what to expect from the project, and they'll come into the experience expecting certain things, as they should. At the same time, sometimes organisations don't consider, or even the deaf person themselves may not realise, that picking up all of the other work that they're doing, such as me coming in as an actor, but accepting the role of translation, the role of consultation, of providing deafness awareness training, and all of those things. I think it's a brave person to say, hey, that's not my role. Please bring in another person to ensure that my role is only as an actor. That's it.
I've had the experience where I've come into a project that I didn't have support or resources while all the hearing people had theirs. That's an additional load that I need to bear, and it causes burnout. And when things go awry, I have to withdraw from the project. I'll give you an example. I was working on a film. It's a bit different than working in the performing arts, but there were certain things that they said they had or would provide, but they didn't. I had to be my own Auslan consultant, direct the space, and be the consultant to the other actors because they couldn't sign. And that additional load is what made me pull out straight away, because the pressure and the lack of support in that space really drove it home to me. There are not enough deaf people in that space to take up different types of roles, like be the director, the writer, and so forth. There was no way I could leave those things in the hands of others who had that role and just focus on the acting. Deaf people are always wearing multiple hats, you know?
Yeah.
And that makes burnout occur so easily. Burnout takes many different forms.
It's really heartbreaking for me knowing that you're in that position, and I know it'd be impossible for you to do your full creative best. You couldn't, because you were so distracted by all the other work you had to do. And it's a case of, how can we set this up, working in the environment, in a space, to ensure that all people are able to fulfill their creative potential and give their creative expression as an actor, as the director, as the producer, a writer, a consultant, all of those roles. And I think deaf people can have sometimes they don't realise that they're doing that. They're just picking up all the extra work, and the industry thinks, okay, that's all right, they're fine.
Yep, I've got a deaf person. Let's tick off that box.
It takes guts to say, actually, no, I'm delegating this responsibility to someone else. If you want me, remember that you have something that they want, like a deaf person, which is me. I come in and I state my needs so I can do my best work and be proud of my work. That's a green flag for them. And we work together to resource specific talent. Sometimes you may not be the right person for the job, and that's okay. You can't be the right thing for all jobs. We get the right person in. And then we work together. It may look like the person having a conversation with you and finding out your needs and what you need to be set up for success. Then for the cast and crew, what do they need? What are their gaps? What are your gaps too? And then you just set up the space for communication. There are so many possibilities and ways of working. Time and resourcing needs to expand, and I find the industry is a little bit too obsessed with outcomes.
And not everything that needs to happen beforehand. They don't engage with deaf people from the start. There are no deaf eyes on the project.
To make all the changes.
For example, as an actor, I'm often only brought in late in the piece for both industries. It's very rare to be brought in earlier. Like when I worked with you on Paris is Fine, that was a really confronting experience. I felt such pride because I was there from the start. We were developing the concept from scratch together. Yes, you were my director, but I was able to contribute what I had to offer as an actor. We collaborated rather than just you telling me what to do. We were in the boat together and you were guiding me along the stream, paddle left, paddle right, I was so confident on stage because everything I said, even if I misspoke a line, it didn't matter because we knew what was coming next anyway. I was embedded in that role, and that is such a rare experience to have as an actor.
Oh, I'm humbled.
You should do it again.
Number 4. Fuck it.
Fuck it. So what's your message to artists and people aspiring to be artists? What's your number one piece of advice for them?
I think we live in a world that is so fucked up. And I just want to implore people to return to the arts, to creativity, to connection. Please, please find your people. If you don't know where to start, you will know someone who is visible. Reach out to them. You have nothing to lose by having those conversations. Read plays, watch movies. Think, what do you like? What don't you like? And then you'll start to narrow in your niche. My niche is different to your niche. We need yours, mine, everybody's. It takes a lot of courage to do it. So sometimes you don't even need 100% courage. You just need a little teeny tiny bit.
Just baby steps.
Yes, plant those seeds, tend to it with water.
Thank you. I really hope all of you watching have taken something away from this discussion. And maybe you might be ready to take that first step. What do you think you'll do as a first step into this space? Let us know.